Welcome to the Scaling Up podcast, where we discuss the real challenges business owners have in scaling their business to the next level. Today, we'll discuss how the pandemic has reshaped the way we approach leadership, presenting unique challenges and opportunities for growth. How can leaders adopt their style not just to survive, but to thrive in this new environment? Today, we're exploring this vital topic with Dr. Bryan Deptula, an accomplished author and speaker with years of experience influencing leaders across the globe. Bryan is the recent author of Leaders Are Born to Be Made, which we will use today in our discussion.
You're listening to Scaling Up, a podcast for business leaders.
Welcome, Bryan. Let's start with the picture behind you. For those of you that aren't listening, what is behind you in the picture that you have for us Delawareans?
This is the Deer Park Tavern, located at the end of Main Street in Newark, Delaware, and it is a pillar of history for University of Delaware and the state of Delaware, as it was visited by many famous authors and used to be a hostel and many other uses throughout the years. But it is a historic landmark that is also a fantastic watering hole for both current students, alumni, and local Delawareans. So if you've been to Delaware and northern Delaware, this is one of the famous haunts that you should come see. It's at the end of, again, 273, I believe, in Newark, Delaware.
As a resident of Yeah, that's right. As a resident of Newark, Delaware, I certainly enjoy going there and grabbing a bite to eat and a pint. It's a great spot. So, and there's a lot of history, like you said. So that was a fun start. So, Bryan, let's start with your journey. Can you share some pivotal moments that led you to where you are today and your leadership vision?
Thanks for the question. The whole story of Dr. Bryan Deptula is long and winding road full of pivots, right? So part of what we do in our life and journey, and part of what I did, is recognize moments that changed who I am. And thankfully, I was blessed to have a lot of people that have mentored me throughout my life and given me a lot of input and feedback. And so when I started my leadership journey, I didn't even know that I'd started. Just like most of us, we have no idea what we're doing or why we're doing it, but it starts in elementary school when people play games like follow the leader. And when you have kids that start following one another, they're like, oh, well, this person's in the front of the line, they must be a leader. And then that person tells you what to do. And then you're in the back of the line and slowly you work yourself up. And then all of a sudden you're the leader and you say, oh man, what do I do? And that starts to form in the back of our brains, this thing called a leader identity, which forces us to ask, who are we and what do we stand for in a leadership role? Like, what does leadership mean? Why am I at the front? Why did I get picked? Who do I answer to? Do I tell people what to do? So when I was a very young person, I started with sports very early on. And my godmother, Charlotte Murphy, rest her soul, godmother, she helped me understand a lot of things about who I was becoming and who I could become as a human being versus who I was at present. And so sports are a huge part of my life, and specifically wrestling, soccer, and baseball. And when I was a young boy in 6th grade, I started playing for my middle school soccer team. And it's fantastic because I was basically the only person on that team that could kick a ball straight. Me and a few other people, but I had played since I was, 5 years old, and whatever you are when you get into 6th grade, what are you, 13 or 12 or something like that? And so I was out there kicking the ball around, and the coach walked up to me and the other players, and he said, hey, here's the deal. You don't have a coach because the last guy quit, and I'm a track coach, but they volunteered me. And so here I am. And so we're like, great, welcome. He says, next words out of his mouth were, we don't have any experience. I don't have any experience in coaching soccer. So we're going to do whatever we can. And does anybody know how to play soccer? And, here's a bunch of kids looking at this adult for leadership where there was none. He was voluntold to do this role. So anyway, after a few weeks kicking the ball around, coach walks up to me on the sidelines. He says, Bryan, you're going to be the captain. And I said, great. What does that mean? And he kind of patted me on the head and said, you'll figure it out. And then he, walked away with no other feedback, no books to read, no ideas, no expectations about what he wanted from me, what I should be doing, just your captain. And so I had never been captain of a team before. And then I sat there unbooting my cleats and taking off my shin guards. And he called all the players together and said in front of everybody, unbeknownst to them, that every team needs a captain. And Bryan is your captain. And so half the team looked at me and they were disgusted because, I'm in sixth grade and they're in eighth or seventh grade. So I was younger than they were. Half of them looked at me that were my friends and said, yay. And there were still others who didn't know what to think. So I went home later that day and I told my godmother and my mother that I was selected captain. And they said, great. What does that mean, honey? I said, I have no idea. No idea what that means. I said, do I tell people what to do? Do they have to listen? If we lose, is that my fault? If we win, am I what does it mean? And so for the first time in my life, I started becoming responsible for other people. And my godmother knew that. And so she started taking me to some high school games and watching other teams and some college games. She said, here's what other teams look like. Here's what a captain does. And here's what you're expected to be. And so I started learning these lessons and then trying them out on the field, and like everybody else who gets into a leadership position, you don't know what the hell you're doing. You just get out there and you just do the best you can. And with nobody guiding you, you don't know. And so you wing it. And so I did that. I just started learning. But the bigger part at that moment wasn't that you had to get it right. And I don't think you ever are going to get it right to be a leader. But the most important parts were that I started to form in my own mind this identity, which is Bryan is leader. I am leader. I am son. I am student. I am athlete, but also I am leader of people. And so that identity starts to form, and then you start trying it out. And I started trying it out in baseball. Then I started trying it out in my neighborhood. We used to play some version of rugby, and I would organize the teams. And so when you start to see yourself as a leader, then other people have the opportunity to respond.
Yep. Yeah. And, I think it hits on kind of the key point, and thank you for that story and introduction, because you don't really know the first time that you lead, right? But most of the time that you realize it, kind of after the fact. But the one common thread is most people are kind of thrown into it and they just respond, right? And not everybody gets, guidance, and it's usually some form of a crisis. I think one of the first big leadership things that I had was one of the guys who was the leader of the team, and I did sports and everything else, but this was in my professional career. He got picked to go do a big project down in Brazil. And all of a sudden it was like, okay, you're going to take the interns and some of the new hires. I was like, huh, me? And, but there you go. All of a sudden it's like, you lost kind of a little bit of your sports structure, but you get in there, you try new things, and you look at different ways to kind of get in and get people motivated, and you learn with probably a couple of failures along the way. So, well, it's a great story. In your TED Talk, in your book, right, you've always highlighted that leaders are born to be made. What kind of brought you to that revelation, and tell us a little bit about it?
Starting back, I had leadership positions throughout life in my organizational roles. And turns out that, I was never selected captain again of another team my entire life. Now, I played rugby in college and I played sports my whole life, and I was on board. So I had different positions of responsibility, but never captain again. And so I started thinking about that situation as I was a leader in an organization. And so I would go out and I would get some mentoring and some development. And turns out, with very little skill, but a lot of ambition and some intuition, I could lead people, right? So I started thinking to myself, how can I be a better leader? How can I be a better manager of people? And the person who I was working for invested in me. So when our private student tour operator and travel organization got purchased by a big public behemoth, he invested in myself and two other individuals. And I went over to INSEAD in France. INSEAD is a well-known business school. And we did an 18-month corporate and executive development program. And I asked the question to a fairly well-known professor who had written a couple books on leadership. I said, this is great. We're here 18 months. How do we make leaders of all people? And he said, oh, well, if you can answer that question, then you might have a book your own. And I was like, maybe you're right. Maybe I should answer that question. And it's interesting because I was back in school and I was thinking to myself, where can my life go? Where can my career go? And I came back and I posed that question to the people at my organization, and they are like, yeah, go figure that out. And so I started reading books, just like Matt Damon in Good Will Hunting. You got a $100,000 education for the price of a public library card. Well, my public library was the Barnes and Noble next to our office. I mean, I just hunker up in the corner, start reading. The more I read, the more I wanted to know. And the more I read, and the more I wanted to know, the more I realized that I didn't know anything. I was up in front of people doing conferences, speaking to 500-600 people at a time, traveling to different countries, leading sales conferences. And I felt like I was right at the start. And so I applied for an MBA. Halfway through my MBA program, I decided I wanted to do research. And so the question that I wanted to research was, how do we make leaders of all people? And what's behind that? And as I was doing my research, I was publishing, and you're doing a lot of research, not just on the papers that you write. I came across this idea that was presented by many, many smart people, that it is a trajectory of experiences, but then there's also some biological underpinnings. And so, at least not in popular literature, no one had answered that question. How are leaders born? A lot of people talk on it anecdotally. And so I just thought it would be a good idea to help people understand that everybody can lead. What do you think? What is your born on date? That's the question that I ask of people. When were you born as a leader? Some people, it's their birthday. And other people, it's like, well, I was thrown into a crisis. So what's your born on date?
I would say my born on date changes depending upon the level and the role as you go through an organization, right? I mean, you talk about it in the book a little bit. You're always continuing to learn, right? And I think that's the thing, and evolve. And what worked yesterday isn't going to be what works with a different team tomorrow, right? And so I think, but the first point in time where I knew I kind of enjoyed, leading a team was in, sports, as you said. And then, quickly coming out, being an engineer and working for Hercules Pulp and Paper Division when they took the senior person off the team, that left me, as one of the top people in the region, and going, okay, you're going to take these other folks and you're going to kind of help them along and lead them. You jump in and you make some mistakes and you learn along the way. But, I really liked, and one of the things in the book you kind of talk about is, your scientifically proven high reward, low risk muscle, and a lot of those things really talk to me, but maybe for the audience, give them an idea what muscle means through each one of the acronyms.
Yeah. So in the book, I talk about the need for us to build leader muscle. And that's based on this idea that, this experience that happened to me when the pandemic hit, my wife and I own a small hotel in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. And we had just bought it at the end of 2019. And then 2 or 3 months later, the pandemic hit. And we literally had no business. Like, it was put into law that no one could travel across states except for first responders and healthcare professionals. And so here we were with this multi-million-dollar business, and literally we're not permitted to host guests. And so I was out one night and someone sneezed on me. And about 5 minutes later, she got her COVID test back. And then 30 minutes later, I was literally crawling up underneath of the Delaware Inlet Bridge that separates Dewey Beach and Bethany Beach, quarantining from my family. No money, no hopes of revenue. It's winter, it's cold. And I looked around and I'm like, how did I get here? I have a PhD, an MBA, I own a business. I've been a speaker for 10 years at that time, telling people how to run their businesses. And I was like, what the problem is? Like, no one knows what to do right now. World leaders are trying to figure it out. Health officials are trying to figure it out. Local community leaders are trying to figure it out. We're all learning to lead again in this moment, because all these muscles that we had, that we were flexing, like, I'm the best at this, or I'm a CEO here, I'm really great at speaking and consulting. all of those muscles were useless. It's like when you haven't done an exercise for a long time and then you're sore the next day, you're like, man, I haven't used that muscle in a while. Well, we had to use crises muscle. We had to use communication. We had to use collaboration. We had to get agreement. We were dealing with people who were moved literally physically from their offices to home. Like, how do we manage that? And so this idea occurred to me that we needed to build new muscle and recognize that we had become weak as leaders. And so what do you do with that? How do you build an appropriate model so that people can understand it? So I built the leader muscle model, and the acronym goes, the M stands for me, because all leadership must start from within oneself. You must first attempt to lead yourself before you even attempt to lead others. Because if you're a hot mess, no one wants to follow you. You haven't given people a reason to follow you. The U stands for leader intelligence. It's understanding people. First, seek to understand, then seek to be understood. I didn't say that. Very other smart people said those, but I'm using this idea of leader intelligence to learn how to lead. And I say I'm learning because every day I learn a new thing. I'm learning from other people. I need to know leadership styles. I need to know what motivates me to lead. And so the S is for strategy, vision, mission, values. A lot of people pay homage to that, but they get behind the desk every day. They put blindfolds on, and then they try to drive their companies without any understanding of where they're going, how they're getting there, or why they're doing it. So the C is about conflict, because conflict is an inevitability. It is ubiquitous in everyday life. And I'm going to tell you something. I grew up Section 8 in Newcastle, Delaware. I grew up in trailer parks. I'm not making that up. Trailer parks. And my mom was funded because part of my childhood, we were poor. I mean, broke poor. And you get into those types of neighborhoods and you start to engage with people in a way that is rough because you're taking your frustrations out in the world. And so my house was full of conflict. My life was full of conflict. And when I got to be an adult, I realized that being angry and ticked off at the whole world and taking it out on everybody undeservedly is not a way to go through life. And so I had to find ways to win at conflict. And I'll tell you a story after this about when I was in Mexico, and one of my business partners said, Bryan, if you win and no one else does, then no one wins. And so I started to look at research and negotiation and figure out, how can I help the person who's in conflict with me achieve their goals? And then I did, and I started to live a more satisfying life, started to achieve more. And look, it's not just me. It's not like I made this up. It's that there is a win in it for everyone when you engage in conflict. All right, so we got conflict. And then L stands for learning. Being a lifelong learner involves leading others. And E means entrepreneuring, being a person who lives with the mindset that they can create value from others by either providing solutions, services, or products.
Yeah. Well, and, we touched on a couple of these things, right? And I used conflict the other day, and after I read the book, and it's where I took the approach to the negotiation is, let's get a win-win approach. Or we're going to recognize we're going to go for win-lose, right? Or I don't think either one of us wants lose-lose, but if we don't resolve this conflict and use this to better ourselves, like that's kind of a critical thing. And to your point, back up one step, there's a lot to unpack there. I thought it was bad that I had to move out of my house and go to a cottage up in northern New York on the Canadian border because I gutted my kitchen when I read you were living in not even a van down by the river, but a tent down by the river in March. It kind of put a new perspective on it and stuff. And I think the MU.S.C.L.E acronym relative to the post-pandemic world, it's not that we all became weak, but it's like training to ride a bicycle and then trying to go out and run a marathon, right? You can do 100 miles on a bike, but if you go try to run a marathon, this is a different muscle group. You're not going to make it very far, and you're a great athlete and you're really good at what you do, but you've got to have the muscle trained to react to the situation that's in front of us. And it changed. And I think that's a great way of putting it. So I appreciate that. I think one of the things that, and I'm going to kind of combine a few things here, that leaders are in all of us, right? They're born to be made. And even as a leader, sometimes we get taught new ways to go lead. And, one of the things I think that really struck me as I was kind of getting ready for this and learning, after reading your book, kind of going back to some of the videos, Why don't you kind of talk through from that perspective how, as a leader, you think you're doing everything right, but all of a sudden, the most innocent way, picking salmon berries with your son, kind of gives you a new perspective, okay, about how about going backward. You think you know it all, and I'll let you tell the story, but I think that's a great example about how, whatever level you're at, there's always a new way to do it and a new way to lead.
Yeah. So is this story about salmon berries involves my son and I, where we were on a trip up to visit a family member in Alaska, and they have a salmon berry, which, first of all, I mean, who knew that, right? Unless like blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, salmon berries, why not, right? So first time I popped a salmon berry in my mouth, I was hooked. I mean, these things are delicious. And so part of the experience of being there with family and everything, and we'd go on hikes and we would be foraging around for salmon berries, all the berries in the world, and you take them home, you make pies and all this stuff. So when we were out there, I had already finished my doctoral program. I was teaching business courses. I was in front of audiences all the time thinking that I know a lot of stuff and you should just listen to me, right? And on top of the fact that I have this position as a father and my son is with me, so I have this kind of authoritarian role in this relationship. And so my son and I were out for a walk and we ended up underneath of this gigantic salmonberry bush, which is at or above my height. Now I'm 5'9", and I'm picking berries at the level of 5 feet 9 inches high, and I'm picking as many as I can, maybe even bending over just a little bit. And when we thought we had picked all the berries, I looked down at my son and he's like shoving berries in his mouth. And he says, "Dad, more, more." You know, he's 2 or 3 years old at the time. I don't recall. I said, "No, you don't want, no, they're done. There's no more salmon berries." And so I'm right? I'm totally, you don't know what you're talking about. He's underneath of me. He's new in the world. I'm older. I understand everything about salmon berries, which I, by the way, am just learning as I'm doing it for the first time. And so as I get down to his level, which is about, 2 feet high or 3 feet, whatever tall he was, to tell him how wrong he was, I realized right in front of his eyes were dozens, more than were on the top of these salmon berries. And he's just reaching in and grabbing salmon berries. And I was floored from the experience that I realized that literally my son, from his position, could see the low-hanging fruit. I mean, it's a metaphor. People say that all the time, but it actually happened to me. And I just stopped. I kind of sat back and I was just like, "Son, you have taught me something about life right now that I had to learn from someone, which is that whatever position you are, in this situation, the bush is the organization, whatever position you are, there's a low-hanging fruit. If you are there, I can learn from you. You see things from a lower perspective that I can't see. People at the top, they can't see down into literally the weeds because sometimes we're looking so high into the clouds and over there that we forget that part of the learning experience is to take people who are in it every day and just ask them, what are you learning? Tell me your ideas. Be open. The more creative you are, the more we can learn from you. But the problem is when we get stuck at the top, we think we know stuff. And when we think we know stuff, we become entrenched in our own ideas. And anything that challenges that is like, no, you don't know what you're talking about. But in fact, the less restraints that we have, the more creative we are, the more we can see, oh my God, there's all this low-hanging fruit. So, if you can learn from a toddler, then you can learn from anybody in your organization.
Absolutely. And, one of the things I get asked, I get called in and, they've taken their top salesperson and they put them in the leadership role. And what made me kind of click with that analogy is, they go in and they know the way that works for them, right? For the height that they're at, that they've got to kind of stay at this level. But then when they go to run the team, everybody has their unique way or their unique viewpoint of looking at it. And there's more than one way to go close a business. And as a leader, you have to respect that, but understand our goal is to get the most berries, right? How you do it, could be not just your way at 5'9", but at the, 3 foot high, toddler's level, and the combination of the two gives you that 1 + 1 = 3. And it's hard for people, especially on the sales side, to get that understanding that, well, this is how I go close it. One, that doesn't work at every account. Two, there's other ways to go do it. It's about the end results. So that's what kind of, led me to kind of bring that one up, because that was a pretty neat story, and I appreciate you sharing that. So one last question for you.
I'm going to ask you a question.
Go ahead.
Because you're in sales training and you're in sales development and you do sales, you lead people, and salespeople are typically wired to be extrovert, A-type personalities, outgoing. But there's also a benefit to having the utilization of your best skills. How do you navigate, since you're out there learning from different people who think they know it all, right? You probably have your own Sam and Barry story. What's your story dealing with people like that in the sales or sales position?
Yeah, so I think, that's a great question, right? So, not every client, is the way I look at it, is the same, right? Whether you're in a garage door business, each homeowner is going to be different in how you approach them. Therefore, your salespeople need to be slightly different also. Somebody's going to come in, be hard charging, to a homeowner that maybe wants a little more guidance and a little more coaching, versus coming in and telling you exactly what to do, is going to be a different type of sell. But the end goal is still the same. So how you go about doing that is you think about, what each salesperson's strengths and weaknesses are. And as a sales leader, you leverage those strengths and weaknesses across the right opportunities or accounts or territories to get the end result that you want. And, there's a skill in that. And it's not always about, and again, that's why a lot of sales leaders, a lot of times when I get called in, it's about coaching that sales leader who has their way of doing it, but understanding there's multiple ways, and that diversity is a good thing to get the overall team results that you want and deliver your results as an individual contributor. And it's one of the biggest reasons why a sales leader fails when they're promoted out of the sales rank into a leadership role, is they got the numbers for the team. And it's hard not to get in there and go drive it for everybody the way that you can go get results, and letting them and coaching them to get to the results that you want collectively, because you don't have the control over everything.
Yeah.
But great question.
And this is part of the reason why I wanted to write the book, and part of the reason why I went and started the consulting and speaking business, is because in your own life, that you are capable of doing a thing. But if you are doing all the doing, you are doing none of the leading. You see? So when I go into organizations, I will typically get a call from a senior manager or an executive, and they'll say, hey, my team is, they're dysfunctional, or I can't get whatever goal that I want out of them. Like, what are you doing? And I'm like, okay, so I'll go in and I'll have a communication with them, and then I'll go interview their team, and then I'll sit down for a conversation with people. And there is nothing about the team that resembles a team. It is a person doing all the doing. And when they can't actually get the goal that they want, they step in and rob the opportunity from that person to try out new things. That's the high reward, low risk loss that they take. Is, well, if you put people in a situation where you can create a low risk opportunity for them to try, fail, learn, redo it, fail over and over and over again, and then you're coaching them up, you're teaching them what you become a force multiplier. And so when you're doing all the doing, you're a product of one, you're a power of one, which is good if you want to achieve results from one person. But typically, organization needs you in a leadership role to be a force multiplier. So the hardest thing that I do as a consultant and as a trainer is convince people that they can't do it all, that their knowledge is the power. That's the wisdom that they share. And if everybody is smarter, better, more efficient, then the whole organization grows, not just you flying in with a cape trying to save the day.
Well, and that's why I think the me part, right, that you talk about when you start with muscle is it's got to be about the leader. And the first thing that's got to come out is, a lot of times people think it's really me. Okay, so I'm going to become the VP of sales and I'm going to run the team. Well, that's putting you in the spot, but are you motivated to go do it? Because that motivation to go through the rest of the thing, are you always adding value? And to your point, it's the force multiplier where you start adding the value. It's not the individual contributor level. And that's where that biggest gap, when you take your best salesperson or best anything, finance person or anybody, and you put them in that CFO role, you put them in that VP of sales role, they get in there and you go from being the doer and the individual contributor to having to lead larger organization, and you got to be motivated to do it because you have to delegate and you have to trust. Okay, and that's a hard step for some people to make.
Yeah, and look, the skills associated with doing a job are sometimes equated with the management of people who do that job. So there's the leadership skill, which is the people, the relation, the vision, mission, values, but then there's also the general competence. So you can be competent at a role and not be a leader in it, or you can be a leader with competence in your area. So a leader needs that minimum level of competence, understanding, and about how they can perform that task or that role that they're asking somebody to do. However, if they lack the relational skills, they lack the patience, the empathy, the listening, the wantonness for other people to do well besides themselves, right? And the problem is, and this is part of what I'm talking about, because in this book, and I speak to people about this all the time, is that the people who are promoting and hiring and are looking for talent are also untrained in what they should be looking for in leadership. So you get people that are like, oh, well, this is a great candidate because they are hitting their goals. But in fact, they're the worst candidate. Like right. If you have a savage salesperson, let that person go eat some meat, right? Like, right. Let them go. The worst thing to do is take your A player out and try to tame them and say, okay, well, now do this. They don't want to do that. They want to eat meat, right? So if we can, and this is the part about learning in the model, is that we as leaders need to educate ourselves. So it gets back to the me, so that we can make the right decision. We can identify the talent, but also identify, look, top performers sometimes just need to perform, not lead. So right. Who are we promoting and for what reason? You know that. You see that all the time in sales folks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's funny, as we've gone through the conversation, you asked me the question, what's your born on date? It probably was when I was living in Portland, Oregon, and it was my first leading a large team. And I had some major failures in that, okay? And took some of those and made a transfer into a different division and kind of reflected a lot upon those. But that probably was my born on date because, it led some people, but as you get to a bigger team, you go in and you think, well, this is the way we got to go do it, and everybody should just do it the way I want to go do it. And that doesn't work when you get across 10, 15, 20 people, okay? You got to find other ways to motivate them and find those intrinsic values to get everybody to work collectively as an organization and a team to get those results together and be bought into it. And it's just a different skill set. So in wrapping up, if you could give one piece of advice to a leader who is struggling with the morale of their team, what would it be?
The sun will come out tomorrow. The deal with morale is that you can create a context for people, but you cannot reach inside their soul to change their level of motivation. And so the biggest thing for morale I have found, and a lot of research will demonstrate this, is that when the leader shows that they're in it with you, when they are there in the trenches, in the times of crisis. If you're struggling with morale, if you're struggling with a situation where you can't get people to perform, you as a leader showing up and being a part of what they're doing is a great motivator for them to say that he or she is suffering with us. Now, the question and the challenge becomes, why do I sing Annie and the sun will come up tomorrow? Because any leader who doesn't give themselves the opportunity to demonstrate that tomorrow will be better than today is not giving people a vision of what the future will be like if they actually improve their performance. So charismatic leaders come out and they are representative of the group. I am here with you. I look like you. I walk like you, talk like you, walks like a duck, talks like a duck. We're all ducks. Let's go marching in a line. But where are we going? So when you give people a brighter future, the sun will come out tomorrow. It may not be physically the next calendar date, but if there's a brighter path ahead for us and I can show you where that comes from, if I can be there with you, but not just working individual, doing all the doing, I'm setting a play in forward. I'm setting a play in motion that we can all be a participant in. And I'm going to be there with you, not just me getting ahead, we getting ahead. That's the most important part. I find, because if you believe that and for some reason your title, your status, your hierarchical position makes you superior, I got news for you. You are wrong. People don't follow titles. People follow people. And if you're going to be a great leader, it's important for you to be a person that is with the people that you serve and also guiding them so that tomorrow is a little bit sunnier than today. That's the deal, brother. That's how I feel too.
No, I think that's great because you're right. It's putting that vision out there. This is the direction we're going to go. It's not going to be easy. We're all going to pull our own part. I'm going to help you. I'm not just going to walk away and tell you that's where we're going to go. Being there with the people, leading the people, and helping them in the times of crisis get over it, but still maintaining that vision is critical. So, well, Bryan, this has been a truly enlightening discussion. Your insights into leadership in this new era have been invaluable. I think it will be great for the audience to listen to, and they'll take a lot away from it. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. BryanDeptula.com. Come on and visit. And thank you, Chad. I appreciate all that you do in helping us and giving us some exposure to the people who really benefit from these types of conversations.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Cheers.